Hello and welcome to the next video on this channel. Today we are building the legendary F-14A Tomcat by Tamiya in 1:48 scale. From what I've heard, it's a very easy to build but still very detailed kit, although I have purchased some aftermarket parts to do a conversion for a very specific F-14A. The one I want to build is a late model, so I purchased the Edward Cockpit set as well as the Edward Decal set to build this lovely VF-111 Sundowners color scheme. The kit comes with decals for the VF-103 Jolly Rogers squadron, but I like the Sundowners livery a little bit more. So let's briefly go over the content of the box. We got the swing wings, we got the upper parts for the fuselage, the two large tails as well as some parts for the air intake, the lower fuselage part, which comes as one single piece, which is very impressive to see, wheels, drop tanks as well as the elevators, all the part for the cockpit, and the engine exhaust nozzles. Up next we have the clear parts and all the parts to build up the landing gear well, and finally all the weapons for the F-14. And of course the kit decals as well as some masks for the cockpit. There's also this little bag with polycaps and screws for the swing wing mechanism, as well as a very extensive information leaflet which goes through all of the different armaments among other things. Finally we have this very large decal instruction sheet, which could also double as a poster that you can hang up on your wall in my opinion. And without further ado, I kick things off by removing the cockpit top from the sprue, as well as the back wall and some elements for the ejection seat. And then carefully add the rudders as well as all the other small parts into the cockpit. Up next I remove all the instrument panels which go on the side of the cockpit, which easily slot into place. Like I said, I'm building my F-14 as a late model, so this Edward look set comes in very handy. Just keep in mind that you do have to make some modifications to the Edward parts to get these to fit. Up next are two very complicated looking circuit breaker panels. No wonder Rooster was so confused about them in the second Top Gun movie. I keep the actual side panels for the cockpit on the sprue for now to make it easier to paint. I continue by building up the nose landing gear well. As you can see, it's very detailed right out of the box, so I didn't bother doing any scratch build or something like that. I then turned my attention back to the cockpit and prepared some parts for the first coat of paint, which is Ammo Mix one-shot primer. The primer is followed by Tamiya XF19 Sky Grey. This color is a very nice base for all the detail painting which will follow. I wasn't able to film a whole lot of the painting process, but anyways, here's the final result. I'm pretty happy about it. Let me know what you think down below. And here is how the cockpit looks with the Edward instrument panels installed. This whole assembly can then be glued on top of the nose landing gear bay to be secured very nicely in place between the two halves of the nose. I then drop some structural panels in place to close the nose up. Following that, I start to remove all the parts for the swing wing mechanism from the sprue, as this kit actually enables you to recreate the variable geometry wings that the F-14 has. Again, this mechanism is very nicely secured and very easy to install, so hats off to Tamiya. And after a quick test of the mechanism, it's time to turn our attention to the lower half of the fuselage. You need to drill some holes here according to the armament you want on your aircraft. And after that I prepared the air intake ramps, which also go on this part of the fuselage. You also built the main landing gear bay right here. I was initially a little bit worried about this whole assembly being very flimsy, but thanks to the nice Tamiya engineering it was all nice. You can also now see me install the holders for the polycaps, which hold the elevators. The back part of the upper fuselage is also added, and now you can start to see that the F-14 is indeed a very large aircraft. Up next I prepared all the parts for the air intake. I did my best to mark all them to not confuse them. And I then gave all the inner parts of the air intake a coat of XF2, which is white. These halves can then be glued together, and at their back end they house the fan blades for the engines. The way these intakes go together does make them have a little seam down the edges, but it's not too bad for me as they are very deep down inside the aircraft. The intakes can then be attached with no fit issues whatsoever. Finally, I add the front of the aircraft to the main fuselage. This process is also again very uncomplicated and unproblematic. Next I did something that almost ruined this whole model, and that is painting the front glass with lacquer paint, which ate through the clear plastic and destroyed the whole canopy. Luckily, I was able to sand it down and polish it and repaint it with Tamiya's X23. As you just saw, I also completed the wings. It was then time to start the painting process of the aircraft. And well, what can I say about painting an aircraft of this size? I think I spent almost an hour just painting the fuselage, not even the wings. But I got there in the end. The technique I am about to use for the paint is called black basing, which consists of painting the aircraft in a black base and then using a very low pressure for the main color to build up some modulation. For the main color I used Vallejo Model Air Colors FS36440 Light Gull Grey. This part of the painting process took even longer than the basing, as you carefully need to fill the insides of the panel and then blending it back together with a low pressure pass. This of course is very tedious, but in my opinion very important for an aircraft, especially the size of an F-14, to break up the monotony of the surfaces. The whole effect may not be visible right now, but it will be more enhanced using washes and oil paints later down the road. Once I'm done with the main color, I use a slightly lightened version of the FS36440 to create a little bit of post shading on certain panels. Up next is a color which is not used so often on builds like this, and that is FS11136 Red. This color of course goes on the vertical stabilizers as well as these little fins which go on the bottom of the aircraft. While the paint was drying, I turned my attention to the landing gear of the aircraft, starting with the nose landing gear, which builds up very easily and looks very nice right out of the box. Up next are the main landing gear legs, and you can see right away what sets them apart from most other landing gears, as these need to be very strong and beefy to handle the weight of the aircraft landing on an aircraft carrier at very high speeds. If you compare these to the F-16 landing gear from last video, for example, it would snap right apart just thinking about landing the way the F-14 does. I also prepared the landing gear doors while I was at it, and then masked off the landing gear wells to prepare them for the next coat of paint. This is of course Tamiya's XF2 white once again. And after I was done with that, I masked off the exhaust parts of the aircraft and painted these with a variety of the F-14A stand colors. I honestly cannot remember exactly which ones I used, but by slowly mixing up and building up layers you can achieve quite a nice effect. Removing the masking tape is very satisfying here. Let's go for another round of masking though, and this time I got the tail hook as well as the wheels. The tail hook has this very nice black and white striped look, and again it was very satisfying removing the masks from this piece. At this point you might be wondering, hey, the cockpit you built looked pretty nice, but where are the pilots are supposed to sit? In this kit you assemble the seats only after installing the cockpit, which I am doing right now. These again look very nice right out of the box, but this time I'm going to use some aftermarket parts which were included in the cockpit set from Eduard. After a round of black primer, I painted the seat cushions with an olive drab color. And then did a dry brushing with a silver aluminium color to pick out some of the details. Here you can see all the photo etch parts that go on the seat and the modifications you have to use beforehand. I wasn't able to film any of the installation unfortunately, as it was very fiddly, but here is the final result. I'm very happy about it. I then organized all the sub-assemblies to start the decaling process. As I've said at the beginning, I'm going to build this VF-111 scheme with the nice red tail and the World War II style nose art. How could I not start this decaling process with the rising sun decal that goes on the tail? The Eduard decals handled very nicely, they set free from the backing very fast and went down without any major issues. I used some MarkFit super strong decal solution to make the decal conform to all the panel lines on the tail. Up next I applied the nose art to the front of the aircraft. Keep in mind, if you want to build it with the leather extended, like I did, you have to do some cutting. Keep the back parts and reapply them to the backside of the leather panel as well as these foot rests. Of course, I also installed the shark mouth to the front. After a while I was finally finished with applying all the livery specific decals. In my opinion it's a very nice looking aircraft right now already. But of course up next was my favorite part of decaling, and that were the stencils. And yes, you are looking at a total of 71 no step markings, which were applied all over the aircraft. After this rather exhausting work, I installed the glare panel to the front of the cockpit in preparation for the canopy part, which is cleverly made out of clear plastic to hide any seam lines from the windows. After that I kicked off the weathering process, starting with a pin wash. The pin wash also very nicely hides the seam lines from the front canopy part. This might look very chaotic right now, but you need to go over the entire aircraft and let it dry completely. And then using some white spirit, I'm using AK Interactives here, and wiping away all the excess, leaving only the wash within the panel lines. This creates a very nice contrast and makes the model look less like a toy. After I was finished with that, I used a variety of Ammo Mix oil brusher products to give this model a little bit of extra dirt and grime. Especially around the engines there is a lot of like oil and fuel staining, which makes this part look particularly dirty. And I also used a grey oil color to pick out some panels to break up the monotony again of the top surface. In the end, I did not go too crazy with weathering on this particular model. But this of course differs by model personal taste as well as the reference images. One final bit of weathering that I did after checking some reference was the area of accumulated grime on top of the wings near the swing wing mechanism. With that out of the way, I started the final assembly process of this aircraft, and for this I like to use superglue, as regular plastic cement sometimes has a hard time sticking to painted and weathered surfaces. I of course started by adding the landing gear and the landing gear doors, and next I added the wheels. The tail hook at the back of the aircraft, as well as these extra fins below the engines. I then installed the vertical stabilizers, and as you can see I also did some painting after the decals, and because I realized that the leading edge of the stabilizers was grey instead of red. To complete the iconic look of the F-14 Tomcat, I installed the wings next, while testing the movement of the swing wing mechanism to make sure it's not sticking in one place. The final control surfaces were of course the elevators, and then finally the engine pieces. These also went in without any issues. Then the completed model touched down on my workbench for the first time. Before removing any of the masks, I gave the model a clear coat with Tamiya TS80 from the can. And then I started my actual favorite part of the model, and that is removing the masks. As you can see, I used double-sided masks also for the inside of the canopy, which makes the frames look more realistic. Now, the second fail in connection to the front canopy was my camera battery dying right at the very moment that I started to remove the masks. Because I really wanted this footage in this video, I took out my phone and took some videos by hand. After a little bit longer break in this build, I also was able to finish all the armament of the aircraft. I decided to arm my F-14 with 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders as well as 2 AIM-7 Sparrows, which go on the side pylons. And in addition to that, 4 large AIM-54 Phoenixes, which go on the bottom of the aircraft. The last bit that I added was the drop tanks and some small antenna pieces, and then I finally finished this build. And here is the final result. I am very happy about how this model turned out, as I wanted to have an F-14 in my collection for a very long time. This Tamiya kit is a very nice base and you could easily do some super detailing if you would really like to. But the only modification I did this time around was the cockpit as well as the chin part to make this a late model F-14A. So while you can look at the final images now, I would like to say thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.